So here is how the car currently sits right now. It's definitely a lot lower than the stock ride height, obviously. Hey guys, welcome to Red 50. Thank you for tuning into another video. And in this video, I want to do a before and after comparison in terms of the drop with the Steeda springs on the Mustang GT. I've got this 2019 Mustang GT, and basically we are going to be installing the Steeda lowering springs. So I want to get a before and after for those of you who are in the market who want to lower the ride basically and see how much difference it would really make. So let me get a couple angles from the back basically, so you can kind of get an idea how it sits currently. Again, it's in stock springs currently, so you can see there's a good bit of fender gap on the rear, but also on the front. So we'll go ahead and measure it, and then once the springs are installed, I'm going to take a in-depth video, kind of walk you through how much difference it's going to make. So let's measure the front ones first. The amount of space I have, I could probably squeeze three and a half fingers in here right now. So if the front with the Steeda springs are going to drop 1.1 inch, and walk into the rear, I can get almost about 4 fingers, so maybe 3.75 give or take. So definitely on the back there's more clearance or more fender gap. The spring that I'm looking at will drop 1 inch in the back and 1.1 inch in the front. So let's see how much difference it's gonna make. I've got my measuring tape as well to get more of an accurate readings on that. So let's measure the back first, how much gap currently it is. It's kind of hard to do with one hand, but rear is about, I want to say 2.25 or so. So on the front we've got, let's see if I stick it here, about 2-inch gap, give or take. I mean, this is what it currently looks like. So let's go ahead and get the lowering springs installed and see how much difference it's going to make. Alright guys, so the car is finally lowered on the Steeda Sport Progressive springs for the Mustang GT. So now let's take a look at what the difference has it made compared to the stock ride height. Now the Steeda Progressive springs are going to drop your car in the front for 1.1 inch, and in the back it's going to be 1 inch. So here is how the car currently sits right now. It's definitely a lot lower than the stock ride height, obviously. But just to give a little bit measurements so you can really get an idea, because typically you will see most of the springs are going to drop your car about 1 inch or so, unless you're getting conservative springs that are like 0.5 inch. Very few springs are going to go 1.5 inch like the iBox Sport line. So these are the Steeda Sport Progressive springs that are going to drop 1.1 in the front again and 1 inch in the back. So let's take a look at it. Before that thing we were able to get about 3.5 fingers or so. Now in the front, I can barely squeeze two fingers in here, so that's pretty tight, and it's still got a little bit clearance. It's not like, you know, it's tucked in completely or it's going to start having some rubbing issues. So 2 fingers here compared to about 3.5 before. And now let's move on to the rear. The rear had more gap before, so we were able to put almost 3.75 fingers. I don't even know if that's possible. But you get the idea. It was a little bit more than 3, very close to 4 fingers. Now if I do 3, I can't do it. 2 fits fine, but I would say there's still a little bit gap here. So I would say 2.25 or so, which has made the car completely different. And I am honestly impressed with the stance this has done. Again, I am still on stock tires and wheels. These are 255s 4019, 255 4019s, a square setup, stock black accent package. So this will get you an idea how your car will look like after you install the Steeda Sport Progressive springs. And I have before and after pictures too, so I'll put them side by side and we can do a comparison for those as well. Alright guys, so here is the side-by-side comparison where you see the Mustang on the stock suspension and also the Mustang on the Steeda Sport Progressive springs. Now again, these springs are going to lower your Mustang 1.1 inch in the front and 1 inch in the rear. And I have to say the difference, especially looking next to each other, is pretty dramatic. Even though this promises a very minimal drop, or I wouldn't say minimal, but it's like 1 inch drop, which is not as aggressive as this iBox Sport lines and some of the springs that are even doing closer to 2 inch, you can tell the difference pretty significant when you're putting next to each other. Now granted, the S550 Mustangs come pretty good from the factory in terms of the wheel gap, because the S197 wheel gap was pretty horrible. So these are much better from the factory, but when you put them right next to the lowered car, you can see how much difference just the lowering springs make. Now here we have a close-up of the front suspension before I had the lowering springs installed. So again, this is the stock suspension, and look at that gap. That looks like a 4x4 gap. And I honestly did not think it looked that bad before I had the springs installed, compared to what it looks like now, where you see the Steeda springs installed in this picture, and the gap is pretty much gone. It's like the perfect amount of gap you would want from a daily driven car. It does not rub. It's still got plenty of room if you want to run 275 40 by 19, which would be slightly taller tire than what I'm running or what comes with the factory. But I mean, it's amazing how much gap there was before, even though I never really noticed it. But just seeing these pictures side by side really puts it in perspective. Now let's take a look at the rear ones as well. It's the same situation. This is the stock suspension setup, where you can see the monster 4x4 wheel gap there compared to one after we lowered it with the Steeda springs. And the gap is still there. It's a little bit more than the front because, like we said, it drops a little bit less in the rear. And then as you saw from those measurements, or when I tried to basically kind of stick the fingers between the wheel and the fenders, there was more gap in the rear to begin with. So you can still kind of see the fender gap is still there, but it's a lot better compared to the stock suspension. So here's how it looks like side by side. And again, a huge improvement over the stock suspension. All right, so I also got the measuring tape with me. It's pretty hard to do with one hand, but since we did it before, I'm kind of curious to see what the difference it has made with the lowering springs. If I recall correctly, it was about 2.25 inch or 2 inches here, 2.25 in the back. So I think just measuring from the top, I want to say it's about 1.25 inches, which is kind of consistent what we would have expected, because 2.2 inches before, this is 1 inch, so about 1.1 inch drop. In the back, it's supposed to be an inch drop, and we had about 2.25. Yeah, I want to say 1.5 or so, 1.25. Yeah, 1.25 is what I would say. Again, this is a little bit more difficult to do with one hand, but obviously when I tested it by just kind of putting my fingers between the fender gap and the wheel, that's more of an accurate one, because you can see it's more consistent. But this one, you can see obviously there's a difference. It was like 2.5 inches before. Now it's down to like only 1 inch, which is still enough room if you wanted to go for a bigger tires or wheel setup. You can still fit that in with these Steeda Progressive springs. Well guys, if you found this video to be helpful, make sure you smash that like button, comment below what lowering springs are you gonna go for your Mustang, and as always, subscribe to Red 50 for more videos.